On today's World Insight, curb on U.S. artificial intelligence chip exports rescinded. What does the U.S. policy shift mean for global innovation and China's own tech advances? What's a more rational way of balancing high-tech chip production with so-called national security interests?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The U.S. administration plans to lift a Biden curb on the export of artificial intelligence chips, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce on Wednesday. The Biden regulation, which is set to take effect on May the 15th, aims to extend limits on AI chips and technology exports. It divided the world into three tiers. Third-tier countries, including China, Russia, and Iran, were blocked from the chips. The U.S. Department of Commerce said the administration would pursue a bold, inclusive, and strategy to American AI technology, seeking to strengthen what they call export controls for overseas AI chips. So what could a U.S. policy change on AI chips mean for global innovation? And how will a policy change likely affect China's technology development and interaction with the United States? Let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in Beijing, Liu Baocheng, director with the Center for International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics. In Portland, in the U.S., Yan Liang, Creamer Chair, Professor of Economics with Willamette University, and also Senior Fellow of the Global Development Policy Center. In Beijing, Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, Professor Liang, tell me more about your take on the latest change. What is the core reasons for all the latest?
Right. So I think for many countries that are in the so-called Tier 2 country list, I think these countries would have more relaxed access to the chips because according to the Trump administration, this kind of country categories will downgrade some of these countries and undermine some of the diplomatic relations for some of these very close allies that fall into the Tier 2, which have restrictions on the imports of high-end chips from the United States. And so these are the countries that include like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Vietnam, and India, Singapore, right? And so I think the idea here is to relax some of this constraints so then the US companies like NVIDIA, who really want to sell more chips to countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE. At the same time, also companies like Oracle wants to invest in data center in Malaysia. So I think the whole idea, I think, is really to provide more market access and more selling opportunities for the U.S. companies. Now, I think for China, I don't see that this kinds of restrictions would really relaxed. I think Trump's administration is taking an approach where he prefers to have the bilateral negotiations. So whether or not countries can access these chips would be part of the trade deal that really hinges on their promise to investment and other conditions that the U.S. may apply at the bilateral level. So I think for China, it's unlikely that the U.S. is going to remove or relax some of these restrictions because the U.S. really sees China as a strategic competitor, especially in the tech space. And as a matter of fact, I think the Commerce Department also issued or signaled that they're going to issue some guidelines that will restrict actually the uses of the Chinese high-end chips produced by Huawei, and also restrict the uses of the U.S. chips in Chinese AI models. Right. So I think the restrictions may be likely actually heightened as far as China is concerned.
We are seeing some latest development, particularly from the U.S. tech companies. AMD has been talking about China as a large opportunity, while NVIDIA also have been providing similar gestures to the U.S. policymakers after also coming to China, talking to their Chinese counterparts. Mr. Bach, tell me more about where is China. Do you think these voices coming from the chip businesses community likely to give additional thought to the policymakers in Washington?
Wei, I absolutely do think that the voices of people like Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, Lisa Su, who is the CEO of AMD, absolutely are having an impact on how this administration moves forward. So we only need to look at the economics of the chip industry in that a large percentage, 20, 30% and up of revenue has to be reinvested in R&D. So China is such an important and a growing market for these companies that they are, I think, very concerned, I would say even petrified of losing the China market, not just for the revenue potential, but because they could lose their technological leadership position. At the same time, Jensen Huang has also said repeatedly, the gap between the US and China is actually not that large, despite all of these efforts by the two administrations, the Biden administration and the Trump administration, to slow China down. I think there's growing agreement that this is really a self-defeating set of policies, and we may see some major changes.
We also saw an interview earlier with Fareed Zakaria had with Bill Gates, in which Mr. Gates has expressed similar thoughts as his other counterparts, such as those coming from NVIDIA and AMD. Now, to you, Professor Liu, we saw China and the United States just reached this 90-day postpone or suspension of the tariffs to a certain extent. Of course, we're all watching very closely. Where do you think is this tech issue vis-a-vis the trade issue?
To add to the previous observation, I could see that on a personal level, Donald Trump takes a personal pleasure by writing off all the footprint of the Joe Biden administration. So therefore, such sort of change. The other issue is that there has been discussion going on in the United States whether how long it's going to turn out to be able to have really transformative and a revolutionary change by the AI innovation. It could take another 4 or 5 years, so that the U.S. need to spread out the market to test their usage and also to have a feedback to their continued innovation. And now, with regard to your question for the trade, I think now Donald Trump has already exhausted his art of the deal in bluffing to the world with regard to all the extreme tariff schemes. So now he comes back to the reality, and he's now under tougher pressure from the Congress, from the business community, and from the consumer society that he has to change. But with regard to the tech control, he continued to narrow the line and target these 4 countries: China, Iran, North Korea, etc., and Russia, of course. So therefore, there's not really much change, but rather to further heighten such sort of control. But whether it's using this as another bargaining chip for another trade deal, that remains to be seen.
What do you think? Where is China, Mr. Mark? You have been doing research on China's tech sector for about a decade's time. Tell me more about, is China reaching to the stage that the U.S., no matter what measures they take, is not going to turn back the clock? In other words, China is strong, technologically speaking, in AI, in chips anyway, and therefore any measures like those taken by the Biden administration would not work.
That's absolutely right, Wei. I think that
No, it's a question mark. I don't know the answer. I want to ask you.
Okay. So my answer then is I believe China is unstoppable when it comes to being a global leader in technological advances. And I think this recognition is growing in the United States, and this is good news. And I'm actually optimistic then about the future of China-U.S. relations because of this. We could look at Huawei. Of course, the U.S. tried its best to kneecap Huawei, and that turned out to have backfired. We look at the advances in electric vehicles. We look at breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. So I think that's absolutely correct. Well, I think the reality is that China has been leading in sectors of artificial intelligence for more than a decade. So it's easy to forget that once upon a time, the ability to recognize cats in photos was considered one of the biggest AI challenges. And there was a generation of Chinese companies, MagV, et cetera, that cracked the AI code of recognizing images. So I think China very early on had a lead. Look at Eric Schmidt's recent New York Times article talking about China closing the gap and even surpassing the United States in artificial intelligence. So I think you do a Google search or do a Baidu search, you can find an unending list of statistics from the number of STEM graduates per year. I think China graduates something like, 80,000 STEM PhDs a year. China, from a data perspective, is leading. But the problem, Wei, and I really do want to emphasize this, is really the perception. And when the perceptions change, we can have a better bilateral relationship between China and the United States, which is why I think it's so important that we see leading voices like Eric Schmidt, who was former CEO of Google and a very important government advisor on technology in the United States, recognizing that, in fact, the American policies to stop China have largely failed.
I think if you look at the industry experts' views, especially lately, the AMD and OpenAI CEOs have just testified in front of the Congress. And so when they were pushed with this question, how far or how close China is catching up on AI, I think, Sam Altman basically says, China is still behind, but really not far. But I think that the view is still divided, right? We know the DeepSeek moment has really shaken the tech world. And we know that, NVIDIA's market value was, basically the tech world was shaken and the value was shed by like 1 trillion just because of the DeepSeek's launch. And I think, as we know, that DeepSeek is spending a fraction of the cost, 5.4 million to train the model, whereas the ChatGPT 4.0 cost about $80 to $100 million, and the OpenAI basically burns $5 billion a year. So there is a huge cost advantage, I think, for the China's model, and not to mention the DeepSeek model is an open source one. So I think the CEO of Perplexity basically said this, right? If it's an open source, it's definitely very attractive. It's very popular for these other AI companies or any other sort of applications of AI. As a matter of fact, in the US, Microsoft, Amazon, Perplexity, they all now embrace DeepSeek and allow their clients to build AI applications based on the DeepSeek's open source technology. So I think in that sense, not to mention some of the hard index of the performances, DeepSeek is at par, if not even superior to OpenAI. Now, that said, I do think that it is still, like Andy said, perception matters. But I think within the Trump administration, the views are divided, right? When you hear people like David Sachs, right, who is the AI and crypto czar within the Trump administration, he still believed that the U.S. government needs to double down on the export controls in order to further, distance China from catching up. And so I think the perception is still mixed within the Trump administration. And last but not the least, if you listen to, Bessent, right, the Secretary of Treasury, what he said basically, look, decoupling does not work. We learned this hard reality, from the stock market, from the bonds market, from the dollar value, from the political basis, from Trump's closest, the billionaire donors, that decoupling with China does not work. And yet they insist on the so-called strategic decoupling, right? So I think the idea is here, we want to decouple China especially on the tech space. And so AI and semiconductors are really the sector that try to protect and try to exercise as much as control as possible and suppress China's progress on that front. So I think the intention is clear. The question is, can they actually do that? And again, judging from China's the progress, the leapfrogging, I think it would be very difficult for them to actually accomplish that goal.
Professor Liu, given your knowledge, we understand Huawei, just as one of those many examples, have been producing a scent chip and has always been advocating going forward in terms of new chips, especially related to AI. And that's just one of those examples in China. We understand there's also widespread government supported campaigns to produce chips. Meanwhile, we are also seeing the private sector ever more active now regarding technological development. DeepSeek is one of those examples. So how do you see business community in China, which I guess is your expertise, are articulating this, especially the private ones?
Well, there has been a lot of ambiguous debates that's going on, how China can really compare in terms of frontier digital technology with the Western world, for which I very much buy in. Mr. Ren, who is the head of the Huawei, in his remark is that there is not really a high reason for China to feel proud, but there is a good reason for China to move forward. But in terms of breakthrough technology, that pretty much relies on critical thinking, which very much the Chinese education is in the lacking. And also it needs more of a fundamental research, and many Chinese business communities do not have such a sort of power. So they continue to improve and amplify the utility of existing technologies. And therefore, China continues to dominate the world with its big manufacturing capacity instead of all the cutting edge technologies. So as for the EVs, which is the prop piece that we have, all other countries, most of other countries can do it. So it's just the Chinese, the industrial strategy that is supporting on that. So therefore, I'm optimistic, but with quite a portion. So therefore, whether the Chinese government is going to re-engineer its subsidy system, that means quite a lot, and that's going to be in response to the U.S. pressure. And also that's going to be in response to the current reality, whether the repetitive inventions at the lower level or lower tier can be avoided, so that money can be further utilized to really to boost on a sort of a waterfall type of approach instead of horizontally carpeting the rudimental technology. So that's something that China does really need to reflect. Last, I think artificial intelligence need a deep dive into the ocean of knowledge. And now, the knowledge base provided in Chinese is nowhere to compare with the English one. So therefore, DeepSeek is already, meeting some limitations in penetrating to the other oceans of knowledge. So given the data flow control, and so that's why I would say that the world need really to come to work together to streamline some of the data control protocols, so that not only China can benefit, but the world can really benefit more.
Yan, to you, there is concern in China, for example, among some scholars, whether more relaxed attitude apparently by Washington and the ease of export control from the United States to China could mean that China might not necessarily that keen on developing the latest technologies, including on chips and on AI, and therefore become less competitive as a result. Do you see, what is your view of that debate?
Well, first of all, again, I don't believe that the U.S. is being more relaxed, quote unquote, when it comes to export control and when it comes to tech containment kinds of policies. I think it's clear Trump administration continues on with, tech restrictions, and I think that the sort of rollback of Biden's policy and double down on this bilateral policies on trade and on technology, I think indicates that Washington is using both a carrot and stick approach, and basically trying to work with allies and try to continue to have this kind of tech containment on China. And I think that the Washington still sees China as a strategic rivalry, especially in the tech space. They're really worried about China catching up in that tech space, and in some ways would threaten the US's national security. So I think the best scenario here that we could hope for is some kind of parallel system where the US is going to have its AI circle, and China will be able to carve out its own market and to be more self-reliant on certain technologies. Unfortunately, I wanted to be more optimistic and hopeful, but I really see that given Trump's administration's current move, I do see that so-called strategic decoupling is on the horizon. Now, that said, I do think that, again, Trump is being quote unquote flexible. He wants to strike a deal. He wants to see where China is in order to decide what the next move might be. So I think it's very important whether or not Washington is going to change its attitude. China should continue to forge ahead and try to develop its own technological capacity. And I think China has a lot of potential when it comes to what you need. When it comes to innovation capability, you need capital, and China has plenty. The big funds has finished 3 rounds of fundraising and have about $80 billion to support the integrated circuit industry. When it comes to talent, China graduates, 1.4 million STEM students every year, and that's 4 times the US's number. China has very affordable electricity, right, from renewable energies, and that would really be helpful to power, right, the AI development and inference. And I think last but not the least, we focus so much on the innovability, but I think in terms of the AI, the diffusion is also very, very important. And I think that's why you hear at Washington, people are talking about how we can work with other countries to encourage more countries adopt the US's system, the US's technologies, because this kind of network effect is really what allowed the US to take a lead road at this point, because the more countries utilize the US technology, the more they are going to continue to use the technology. But I think China still has the advantage, right? It has a very large market. The user case is huge. Just think about autonomous driving as one way of applying the AI technology. China is going to have 1.2 million autonomous drivers on the streets by 2040, which double the amount of the US's. So I think, again, there's a lot of potential on China's capability, not only to innovate, but also really to diffuse the AI technology.
We have seen over the past few weeks, meetings of international, most well-known VCs as well as investment firms urging the projects that they are investing in to churn out more concrete results and revenues. That certainly has been reflected in the latest trends of developing of agents of artificial intelligence. How do you see this part is likely to be another momentum of energy in China for innovation?
First is what's called agentic AI. So this is artificial intelligence applications that have the ability to act on their own. So today we use a chatbot. We ask a question, we get an answer, sometimes very, very good answers. But an agent can do things like if I say, I want to go to Paris next week, it can go not only book the plane ticket, book the hotel, book the ground transportation, make the restaurant reservations, but it can actually negotiate on my behalf without me having to be involved. So this is potentially enormous. And again, as you said, Wei, I think the Chinese market is unique in its ability to quickly adopt effective innovations. And the technical word, of course, is diffusion, which we see in a number of areas. The other part of this, though, is AI, or what we would call embodied AI. So AI in robots, AI that can act in the physical world. And again, here, when we look at China with its manufacturing capabilities, and not just low-cost manufacturing, but advanced manufacturing capabilities, with its advances in artificial intelligence. And here, it's not just large language models, but we need new kinds of AI models that can understand and predict the physical world, so laws of physics, et cetera. So this is a big question mark. Can China achieve important breakthroughs here? I think if we look at the historical record, again, I'm optimistic that China has overcome technical challenges that no one believed possible, from launching satellites, missiles, other kinds of space travel, deep sea we've talked about. the leadership in electric vehicles. And here I would disagree a little bit with Bao Cheng in that there are actually enormous technological hurdles to making commercially viable batteries, material sciences, chemistry. That China really has had important breakthroughs, which is why it is able to lead in this area.
We understand there is not only the trade talks or the trade negotiations and debates among countries, for example, between China and the US, between the EU and the US, but also about the tech sector. We see Europe is rushing to develop more in tech sector, both innovation capabilities and investment in that, as well as bringing more talents onto the European continent. And all of these are taking place in different versions around the world. How do you see now the latest US decision to be in terms of chip and tech exports toward China and others would mean for its own capability of being attractive at all for the rest of the world?
I think the government is playing an actually very important role here. I think when you look at Trump's administration, they're really rolling out a lot of their erratic policy. They're certainly at their own foot. So when you think about Trump's slash the budget for National Science Foundation, right, the proposed cuts was like 45% of budget. I think that really undercut the U.S.'s long-term prospect of technological innovations. There's a recent survey done by the Nature, and they basically surveyed 1,200 scientists. And an overwhelming share, 75% of the scientists say that they have the intention of leaving the country because of the interruption in their scientific research. So I think in that sense, even though Trump has been boasting about attracting billions of trillions of dollars of investment in the U.S. With the Stargate project and so on and so forth. But the reality is the U.S.'s economic conditions are simply at this point really not very supportive for many of these large initiatives. AI, used to be a really money-burning kind of a money trap, but I think DeepSeek has showcased money is important, but it's not the only factor. So I think for Trump's administration, I think really the sort of the spirit searching needs to, I think they need to do some of that, especially when it comes to they don't have a holistic approach. They don't have a very strategic thinking in terms of how to really bring investments to the country and how to really nurture the kind of AI development. When it comes to AI development, just the market itself is not going to be very helpful, especially you have all these monopolies that are trying to limit the access to AI instead of spreading the technologies to a broader uses. And also without very holistic approach to develop the infrastructure, to train the workforce, and to really think about the ways to nurture these entrepreneurs rather than, one day is the Chip Sciences Act earmarked $39 billion to develop the AI or semiconductor industry. The next day is a new administration comes in and want to rescind some of these earlier policies. So I think all of these are not conducive to the kinds of long-term development in AI and other breakthrough technologies, because all of these take time and take a lot of patient capital and take a lot of talent and infrastructure and complete supply chain and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much for now. Yan Liang, Bao Cheng Liu, and Andy Mok. Appreciate it. Thank you. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.